Welcome back to the Noise Podcast. Live from Queens, New York. We're here for week 15 on the show. This season, we're pulling back the curtain on the grind of betting an entire NFL season with an analytical approach, real-time reactions, and an honest look at the highs and lows each episode gives you at the seat as the NFL season unfolds. Whether you're betting alongside us or just here for the sweat, welcome back to the Noise.
Don't work. Smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics.
The analytics don't mean anything in football. Take those numbers and you can make them say whatever you want.
The numbers, basically. What do they mean? The numbers, basically. What do they mean?
We have a great episode in store for you today. We'll talk a little bit about week 15, but I do have a special guest on the episode today, Sam Foley, the founder of No Huddle. Sam, welcome to the Noise.
Thank you much for having me, Max. Pleasure to be here. Stoked to be on the Noise, and let's do this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What we generally do with the show is, we're kind of talking about the upcoming week. We're talking macro thoughts on the NFL, what we're seeing. But a really important part of what I try to do with the show is talk a little bit about the sports betting landscape and kind of where we are in the marketplace, if you will. So my first question to you is, No Huddle, can you give me a quick rundown of what you guys are doing and, what that's all about?
Yeah, man. And thanks again for having me on. This is really awesome. What a setup you got, and really a huge believer of what you're building here and getting to chat through. And, it's so funny how bonds kind of come together, right? We've met a few times and immediately we connect over sports and betting and all these kind of things that I love, these kind of core themes and topics of our life, right? So I think kind of tying that all together, I grew up in Boston, growing up in the early 2000s, in Beantown. Talk about getting the luckiest upbringing ever and having sports really become part of my DNA. When I was 3 years old, it was the first Patriots Super Bowl and kind of the dynasties then reigned.
Yeah.
And so ever since I was little, sports has been really just a part of my life. And I've always thought about, one day when my playing career ends, which I had bigger dreams than I ended up playing, through, but I always thought about how I could connect sports back to my day-to-day life, right? And so, as my career is kind of in the real corporate landscape here of New York, like we were just catching up on, has, bobbed and weaved, I've tried to build something, in No Huddle that I'm hoping is a platform to speak about sports, similar to what you're building here, but kind of put them in a way of what are these industry themes that we're following and that are big, and breaking them down in a very digestible way, right? So, whether it's my mom reading it who loves sports but may not know at a deeper level like we do, or it's a sports nerd like us, being able to, add up for that audience and be able to tee it on a platter for them is something I started just in April, and I have 13 editions in of 13 different themes. And, I think a cool layer too that I'd love to, and I know we'll get into, is I'm matching all these industry themes with companies that we may not know in the space and partnering with their founding group or their executive team to tell their story, right? So who are the stars of tomorrow in the betting space, right? Who are the stars of tomorrow of just the overall sporting world, the sports tech landscape. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to, just put sports on another platform just like you, and I'm pumped to be here and chat about it. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're lucky to have you. I got two immediate questions based on that, right? First off, you said your career being over. What did you play? Did you play in college? What was what's your background there?
Yeah. So I grew up, I played football, basketball, and baseball growing up. Up to the high school level, I dropped basketball. My younger brother's much more skilled. I couldn't have a sport that I was that much worse than my younger brothers at, so that fell off. And then I played quarterback and shortstop all the way through high school. Was fortunate enough to go to Needham High School and see a lot of successes as a team there, and have the opportunity to play at Hamilton College as quarterback for a couple of years. My career, unfortunately, ended really shortly. I played basically 1 or so years and had a hand injury that hung it up. But I was able to play quarterback, at a D3 NESCAC level. So whatever, measure of high you want to say, that's nothing compared to some of these guys nowadays. But yeah, I was, lucky enough to play that, have that experience, create that bond and see the next level of competition in football. And like we said, it's been a part of my life, ever since, and just get to see it from different lens now as a bettor or a fan, right?
No, absolutely. I think that's like kind of one of the more interesting things that I try to talk about is like, when you understand the game at a high level, how do you translate opinions or just like general knowledge of the game into actual predictive opinions, right? Like, you run into a lot, and I make fun of them a lot. And, I don't try to take offense to this, but like, when guys play at a high level and they end up commentating, or, you have ESPN where there's guys now giving betting advice because, they played the sport. Like, to me, I'm like, that is not good, right? Because I worry about guys who know the sport well and are just now betting on the sport because they think they know it. So part of what I try to do is like, okay, you have good knowledge of the game. You would be able to read a scheme. Let's just say if you're under center, what the defense is doing.
Sometimes I sure did. Don't want to pull up the film.
But hypothetically, right? How do you now translate that opinion into a predictive, whether it's a metric or, trying to quantify your opinion? So, we'll get into that a little bit, but I also want to talk a little bit about who your target audience is for No Huddle. You mentioned kind of a crossroad between a couple corporate partnerships or the tech world. So who's your ideal listener, and what are you looking for there?
Yeah, it's a great one. And I'm really happy to dive into that. So I think, for No Huddle, the idea was, like I said, kind of democratizing sports, which is such a wide, the depth and breadth of sports and what you can do and work in sports and learn about sports. Betting is only, a subset of the sporting landscape, right? And so what I wanted to do is try to, create sporting, like a kind of a memo or a breakdown of sports and what's going on. People read all these headlines, and then there's all this jargon and people don't really understand it, right? So when I think about the ideal reader, it's a person like, you, me, like we said, the average Joe, right? A sports fan who wants to dig deeper. But as I think about my career, what I really want to do one day is be able to invest in kind of what I say, going under the hood of the sporting world, right? Who is going to be, like I said, the stars of tomorrow? Who's going to be the technology that's going to take the betting world to its next level? How are we going to, I'm a Patriots fan. How are the Patriots going to, optimize their team to see the next dynasty come true, right? So there's so many companies kind of working in there. And as I've tried to, recalibrate and rebuild No Huddle into what I really want it to become, I've kind of built my investor base to become sports executives and sports investors in the space, right? Because now I'm partnering with founders like you, just like kind of what you're building, and telling your story. And maybe there's one day in your story that you want to have outside capital in, and here we are. You've already been featured on No Huddle. You've already had a great number of readers of people who are going to use your product, listen to your product in this case. And you've already told your tale to a number of people, and now you have the kind of connections, and hopefully I can be the one writing the check or using someone else's money in the VC space to help see and help your growth.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great crossroad, especially too, where when we talk about the future of sports, and the future of sports betting is always going to be connected to that with like the level of partnership we're getting. I mean, when you watch a sports game, you see DraftKings, FanDuel, all these operators like they're basically on the jerseys, right?
Yeah.
Like the NHL, all the jerseys are Fanatics. You see it everywhere. Yep. I have some thoughts about what that does to the sports world, but I mean a perfect example to me is like a guy like Eric Eager. So he was at Sumer Sports. He's, one of the guys that was at the forefront of, kind of sports betting analytics. So a lot of people in the sports betting community are really, they're supporters of him, and they, used his products and kind of used his ability to translate analytics into predictive metrics. And now you see with him, he's one of the head people in the front office at the Carolina Panthers. So, I mean, the Panthers are a good story this year. I don't think they're quite there yet. But, just of that kind of, in that ilk, like people who are understanding where the future is going, whether you like it or not, about the analytics. And, there's a lot of run the damn ball people out there. But, a guy like Eric Eager, right, who was able to come from that pure analytics background where, a math nerd or whatever people say. I mean, people call me that all the time, but, and now he works, I think he's the VP or something
running the show down there,
at Carolina. So it's an interesting space to be in. And, it's cool to kind of think about what the future actually looks like for this thing of ours.
100%, man. I think it's really interesting you bring that kind of analytics point up, right, and how much it obviously crossed over to betting, but thinking analytically and being data-driven first, right? Football, to me, seems like the last sport to get there, and almost like betting has kind of pushed it on top of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you think back to, one of my favorite movies ever, and this was part of like Red Sox lore in a way, but Moneyball, right? Mm-hmm. Baseball was kind of the first to say, let's put data first, and I know the Boston Globe rags on the Red Sox because they, this pitcher, we care more about his spin rate than his wins, losses, right?
Right.
But how the evolution of stats have really changed in baseball, like, back in the day, it was what's your batting average. Then it was what's your on-base percentage. And now there's, I don't even know them at this point, but there's so many, acronyms and sets of letters that actually measure how good a player is. And I'm reading the hot stove for the Red Sox, and it's like, hey, they just got this pitcher. And the thing, all the leading anchors are not his ERA, his innings pitched. It's, his effectiveness, his spin rate, like we talked about, how many strikeouts he has, some ratio. And football is now starting to really get into the same thing. And Sumer Sports, I think, is, an amazing, example of that. And they're actually in my pipeline. I've spoken with a couple people over there to feature No Huddle. So that's a perfect kind of crossover that I think we're going to see more and more in that. And, you look at the Panthers, even earlier this year, it seemed like, what's going on down there? Is Bryce Young the guy? But they kind of have trusted a process. They built a process that's clearly data-driven, analytically focused. They had a great draft class, I think, that a couple in a row now they're really building on. They signed some free agents that have been helpful, coaching staff, right? And it's all kind of plugged into a new ecosystem down there. And, you're seeing the success. They're right at the lead of the NFC South somehow, some way, right? Who would have thought if we did this a couple of weeks ago, when the Pats played them, we would have ridden them off.
I mean, so like not to nerd out, quote on for a second, like Carolina is like very interesting in this kind of halfway ecosystem where they are very analytically driven in terms of the roster they've built, and obviously hiring a guy like Dave Canales, who's a quote unquote forward thinker, and Bryce Young, who according to the tape, hasn't been that great. And according to a lot of advanced metrics, has been average, if not worse than average. But Carolina is kind of entering this meta where, yes, we've been so focused on efficiency. And I mean, of course, in the tech space, in every space that we see, everyone is talking about efficiency down to like, what you eat for breakfast. What's the most efficient way to get your protein?
Optimize your whole life.
Yeah, right. And don't get me wrong, like, I am a numbers guy, and I get concerned a little bit with like kind of the overemphasis on, optimization and that stuff. But bringing it back to football, right? Like you're seeing Carolina with this kind of run heavy, almost fairly inefficient offense. But, I talk about this game all the time with the Packers. I like literally keep going back to this game, and I know it's because...
That's where I lost Survivor, by the way.
I was going to say, it's exactly because I lost my Survivor picks on this game. But I come back to this all the time is because, by the numbers, quote unquote, and numbers, I mean EPA, like Carolina got blown out by the Packers. The Packers had much better success rate, much better EPA, right? But they had a bunch of plays that didn't go their way, and that kind of dictated the game. And what Carolina did was run the ball, hold the ball, and eat up the clock, which is efficient. Even though the offense in itself is inefficient, the best defense is not letting the other team get the ball.
Right.
So it's really, really interesting where we're kind of entering this kind of I want to say meta on the meta where everybody's used to, everybody's starting to come around to we need to be more efficient as an offense. And you can see the teams that clearly aren't there are really behind. And the teams that are there are ahead. But then you have this crossroad of like the Panthers don't have the talent yet, they're potentially going to be a playoff team because they're understanding how to translate that into winning games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a funny point, right? If you take a step back, what are we kind of measuring here, right? Like that's like why we love sports, right? Exactly. Like every metric and advanced metric would say the Packers should win this game. The Panthers should not be leading the NFC South.
Right.
But look, here we are. If you're a Carolina fan, I'm sure those people down in Charlotte are absolutely stoked. They don't care what the metrics say because they're winning.
Right.
And that's kind of the fun weight where any other business that our day-to-day jobs, right? If you're falling behind on metrics or how you stack up to who you need to stack up is failing, you're not going to win. But sports, look what happens. You can pull it out because there's some things that you can't even really track, or you can track, of course, the time possession or running the ball and things like that. But sometimes it's luck, and sometimes it's just a matter of, we're kind of feeling it. There's momentum too. Like that's something that you can't even ever really track. And I think that's why we love sports and football, especially, is like there's so many puts and takes.
Right.
And then across a long season, you never know what's going to happen. And you get to wherever we're at, week 15 now, right? And there's some things that we would never have expected. Or who's in the playoffs right now.
And that's what football kind of, I don't want to say it's all about, but like that's what makes it so interesting to talk about. That's what gives us the opportunity to do a show like this, to talk about it, is because you honestly don't have that many data points. Like, baseball, right? You have 162 games. You have thousands and thousands of individual pitches that you can track. You can go granular to say, hey, this guy, he has an average spin rate of this, and that's actually predictive, because I think that if he continues to throw his sinker with that spin rate, they're going to start missing. But in football, you can't really do that, because by the time you have predictive data, you're in week 15, and teams that are quote unquote good are out of the playoffs. And look at the Chiefs, right? The Chiefs are, in my power rankings, a top 5 team, but they're highly probable to miss the playoffs. Yeah. And I've bet the Chiefs multiple times throughout the season. Sorry, guys. Giving out multiple picks like, hey, we're going to take the Chiefs in the division.
This is the week, yeah.
Right, we're going to take the division. I took some AFC championship last week thinking like, okay, well, if they beat the Houston Texans, I think they have a massive leverage to win the AFC. So that's why I bet, the Chiefs win the AFC at that point in time. Obviously, if you're wrong, you're wrong. And that's kind of the game we play. But that's a good example of a team that is analytically sound, does a lot of stuff that is, quote unquote advanced, but they're losing fucking games.
Yeah.
So it's hard to measure that stuff. But again, like, I think that's a whole lot more interesting than, who's good, who's bad.
Yeah. And I think, you bring up the Chiefs point, and then another team that's kind of not hit expectations, so to say, and their fan base puts extremely high ones on, just like Boston, are the Eagles, right? And they're one of the most analytically forward teams as well. Like, look at their front office, what Howie Roseman's been doing,
right? How
he's structured all their contracts. He's done a lot of dead cap backloading things to build a roster that we saw last year in the Super Bowl. They destroyed the Chiefs, and I don't want to say ended, because I'm a believer in what the Chiefs are building, and obviously Mahomes is such an amazing player, generational player, but put a pause in their dynasty where the Chiefs got whooped so bad last year in the Super Bowl, they aren't even going to make the playoffs this year.
They're reaming at this point.
It's not 1-to-1, but something like that, of Howie Roseman built a team based on analytics, put a staff together around him. There's a few people who are Goldman Sachs with backgrounds that he poached over to bring to football, because he said, right, data, analytics, let's apply it to something that we all love. And, that's speaking for last year. This year is an interesting thing, and we can dive into the Eagles as they're, a hot topic of conversation, but they're still in the playoffs, right? They're still in a good spot, and the panic button is always louder in these big cities.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great point to kind of weigh, right? The two teams last year, very analytically focused, Super Bowl, and then how they've kind of found their need to find their footing again. And there's lots of, changes too, of who leaves in free agency and such.
Sure,
But that's just, I think, another great point. Chiefs, Eagles, two great analytical teams. They've seen a lot of success over the past few years driven by that.
I mean, that's what I bring up all the time. If someone's like, oh, well, these analytic teams don't win, right? These like pure EPA focused teams, they don't win. Like, my number one example is look at the 2024 Eagles. Like, that is a Howie Rosen championship. Honestly, I do not think Sirianni is a good coach. I don't think he makes optimal decisions. I think Jalen Hurts is a mediocre, if not slightly good quarterback. Running backs, I'm of the camp that don't really matter, even though I am a former Giants fan. And Saquon Barkley is like, he is an elite running back, but I don't think it matters that much. And, that's the perfect example of, this is a team that built themselves with data, optimize their contracts, as you mentioned, so that they could build a team that's going to win for multiple seasons. And again, offense aside, I think, they're having a hard time. They lost their OC. Yeah. Sirianni was never that great to begin with. And I think that is a whole lot more to do with why the Eagles are struggling right now than, Jalen Hurts is bad or, whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that front. Yeah.
It's interesting. But I do want to circle back quick. I think we'll get into some more, macro NFL thoughts in a few minutes. But, part of what I like to do with the show and talk about, there's a million different podcasts out there that are going to give you their picks. I would argue most of them suck, but there's a lot of people that are going to tell you their opinions and their stuff like that. So I'd love to kind of differ and talk about is like, what does real life look like? We can sit here all we want and say, hey, we're an expert in XYZ, and I can give you a bunch of data points to tell you why I bet what I bet. But there's a human element to it, right? There's your fan. You're a Patriots fan. You're a Boston guy. How does that bias affect you? So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit. Like, how are you balancing? Okay, I'm a really big fan of these teams, regions, whatever, and how does that affect my work?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. So I know we were catching up on this before, but I have, ever since this betting wave, right, of, now sports books are left and right to every commercial, it's kind of thrown in our face, and it's as easy as a couple clicks on your phone. I put down a cardinal rule for myself because, just my own mental health and also my bank account. I'll never bet on a team that I like, right? So all my Boston teams, they're out there. I don't even look at the line, or I'll look at the lines to know, but I will never touch them because, if a team loses and I lose my bet, I'm not gonna be a happy camper going home to, my lovely girlfriend at night, and we can't have that. So It's funny you bring that up because that's like kind of, I've made that rule. All my buddies at home in Boston are Pat's money line, Pat's this, Red Sox, this is the night, we're going to beat the Yanks, right? So I've drawn that, and I found good happiness in that because I think it's all part of life, right? You can't have sports be your end all be all, even though it kind of is in some ways for us, right? It's part of who we are. But so I think, aside from kind of drawing those hard lines in terms of, spreads or money lines or over-unders even within that for my teams, prop betting is something I've definitely found an interest in, and I think it adds a really fun dimension to the game for betting on, right? And it's funny to bring that up because that's a big thing in college sports right now. Is should prop betting be allowed? In the NBA, there was a whole scandal about
have multiple,
players taking themselves out of the game and all these issues there. And so for me, that's kind of been my alt way of Saquon Barkley, who have a couple touchdowns, right? Of trying to think about the slant of the game. Of you look at some metrics, you think about the Eagles, how they're going to approach a game. I think, Barkley's going to be fed. Take something with some juice with 2 touchdowns like that, right? So kind of those thoughts. I will say, especially on a relative scale, I think my thoughts toward betting and actual bets are on a lower compared to, I think, a lot of our friend group and stuff. But I still am fixated on all the games and I love, and I have Red Zone on, I have the Patriots and Red Zone on, right? And why do I have those on? It's because for bets in fantasy football, right? So it's kind of both of those blends, and it's definitely part of, your whole week. You're looking ahead, you're looking forward to Tuesdays when waiver wire comes for fantasy. The lines have been out. You can kind of try to see if you can get any CLV if you bet early on in the week, right? And not to mention kind of the social aspect of it, right? Like how many times have we bonded over a drink or whatever, talking about the line, right? You on this game? It's Thursday Night Football.
Right.
And I think that social angle to betting is, we all, of course we want to be all good concerns about, gambling addiction stuff. That's very major in betting within your means. But the social angle I think is really fun, and anyone could throw $5 on a game. Right. Anyone could be like, yeah, have the over. Like, I don't care if either team wins, but let's root for some more touchdowns, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a football fan. And so I think, you kind of put those and triangulate all those things. That's kind of my philosophy as a bettor of kind of like, no Boston, find a couple things to, have fun on with some of my reads of, how I'm looking at a game plan. And then the social angle I think is really fun too. You're watching a game with a bunch of buddies. Maybe you throw in a parlay for fun, and you all root for for that to hit.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean that's a super good segue, and that's an interesting thing that I try to talk about a lot. Like, as a bettor, your number one advantage is you don't have to bet, right? If you're a sportsbook, you must put up a line for everything. You need to put up a spread, a money line for every game. And now that we're in this landscape of prop betting and micro betting and all these little companies that are coming up and introducing new products to the marketplace, like if you're DraftKings or FanDuel, you need to line everything. And their advantage is nobody's looking at the price. So you have you want to bet on who scores the next touchdown. Yeah, sure. Have fun. Me and you could sit there. We can have 8 drinks and be like, yeah, Saquon's definitely going to score that shit. And, we're betting into a market that has a 40% VIG.
Right.
And that's the sportsbook advantage because it's such a chance, right? So they take a big VIG on stuff like that. So my advice to people always is, don't bet into those markets because if you don't have a good, if you don't have a sound opinion on where, why this is priced that way, you're betting into a really big disadvantage. And that's the crossroad to me between trying to make money betting on sports and having fun. Because if you're going to have fun betting on sports, I advocate to people don't even go down this route. Don't start to look at all the stuff that I look at. You know what I mean? Honestly, take my pick. Join the Discord. And remember, the Discord is the only place you can get all of my picks in real time. We bet every night pretty much, but part of what I do is betting early in market and trying to beat lines and stuff like that. So I always advocate for people to kind of follow the Discord along so that they can have they can have good solid bets. But again, if you want to bet, if you want some action on the game, yeah, take a bet. And enjoy it. Bet within your means, of course. Be cognizant of gambling addiction is a really big issue in our society. And if you want, we can kind of talk about the macro effects of that. But bringing it back, like if you're gonna toss in a parlay with your buddies and watch the game, just do it. Like don't go down this path of trying to optimize all this stuff, because you're not gonna be able to do it. You saying, oh, I really think this team is good or XYZ, you have the same advantage as, me asking some random person on the street to pick 5 picks.
Totally.
And it's a scary place, but I really try to separate. Like, if you want to make money betting on sports, there's a way to do it. And again, we're not professional gamblers, right? I don't bet for my full-time income, but I do make money betting on sports. This is how I do it. And yeah, if I want to hang out and go watch Thursday Night Football, let's toss in a bet and let's just enjoy it.
Right, you're right on, and I think you make so many good points right there. But like, there's really levels to this, right? And let's think about. There's a reason why there's companies like DraftKings and FanDuel and Caesars, and you take another step back, casinos. Why is the Vegas economy like it is? Because people are so drawn, and these books, they know what they're doing, right? They have the VIG, like you mentioned. They have all the data backing of why these lines are the way they are. Every game, not every game, but I've been to so many games where somehow, some way, the spread comes down to the last play, and you're like, how do they know this? Like the runs and how the clock was managed, and it's like it comes down to that, right? And so never try to outsmart the book, I think, is one of my big themes. And if you do want to bet for money, not for just fun on the social angle, follow some type of structures, follow somebody who does really track and is transparent, right, like you are about your picks and your win-loss record, right, and kind of hold yourself accountable and do it within your means, right? There's a ton of professional handicappers that you can find. There's great guys like you who have that level of analysis that a professional one does, but you also have a job that's paying the bills that you don't have to worry about the ups and downs as much.
Right? Like,
exactly, and that's the fun part of it. But I always think, like, how many times do we see, there's a reason why these companies have the market caps that they do. There's a reason why they're so enormous. They're going to win more than they don't, right? If they didn't, those companies would not be around anymore.
Right.
And so don't try to outsmart the book. Of course, there's going to be amazing opportunities. I caught BYU last night live at plus 500. They were down by 20 at half, and that's awesome. But those are a dime a dozen, right? Those aren't going to happen frequently. And as a matter of fact, if you play that out, you're going to win that 1 out of 20 times, and you're probably going to be net negative at the end of the day.
But again, that's the importance of understanding the price, right? Because,
exactly.
Let's just say you were right that you're going to win that 1 out of 20 times, right? Then your plus 500 bet is wildly inefficient, right? Whatever, you had fun. That doesn't matter. But if you were trying to make money, right? Let's say you were offered 30 to 1 and you think you have a 1 out of 20 chance to win. That's a really good bet. You should bet that as much as you can. And that's the game, I say that's the game we play, but like it's a matter of price. And I think you run into a lot of issues right now with sports betting where it's getting so popularized and we're talking so much about who do you like, who's going to win and who's going to whatever. And nobody in the mainstream marketplace is talking about what is the price that you're paying for this stuff. Like if you bet on a football spread, right? You're betting minus 6.5, plus 6.5. You have minus 110 odds, right? If you bet $10, if you bet $11, you win 10. That's a 52.5% implied probability, meaning that on both sides, sportsbooks have a 4.5% hold. Now, again, if you want to have fun, you want to bet a game, don't worry about 4.5% hold. But if you really think you're going to make money, are you really going to say that a team is going to cover that spread more than 52.5% of the time? And if you're not doing that, don't try to make money betting on sports, because that's what you have to do.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting too to think about the gamification of betting, right?
Yeah.
Now that it's on our phones, everyone's talking about it. It's every other commercial. It's the sponsorships, like you were talking about earlier. It's so fun. It's so easy to do. You don't think about the next level, the second, kind of the second order thinking of like, you're just kind of giving away money at some point, right? Like you could be getting better odds somewhere else. And I know we'll probably get into it soon with prediction markets of how, they're kind of reducing that VIG, and it's actually bringing kind of the finance background into it of you're trading peer-to-peer kind of in a way, right? It's an event contract of you're taking a side and you're hopefully not giving, the book isn't taking any hold in the middle, but you're paying kind of a premium either way for your return. But yeah, I think that's a super interesting point to always think about of, just having that second order thought of I know it's so fun to click around and, the more you click, the more your return is.
Yeah.
But there's a reason why these companies know, they know who they're trying to get at. They know what feels gamified. They know what people want to do and how to optimize your clicks and, give you boosts where you need and, fall into traps, et cetera. But just kind of being mindful of that. That's not to say don't necessarily do that, and if you're having fun and you're
Right.
within your means, but just being mindful of kind of that thought process and what's going on.
Yeah.
Of you're kind of being put into a video game in some ways, and it feels like it, right? When I go into DraftKings, it definitely feels like I'm playing a video game, and and there's no end to the journey.
No, absolutely. I think again, if you want to make a 5-leg parlay and you click 5 things and you have fun and you bet something that you're willing to lose, dude, like literally don't even listen to me. Like just have your fun, do your thing. But if you expect to make money when you wager, then you can't do that. And so that's the buzzword we're talking about right now is gamification. And I know that on No Huddle you wrote an article about this and kind of what the gamification of our lives really have entered our sports world, and obviously the crossroads between sports tech and sports betting and general sports. So can you talk a little bit about just that article? I thought it was super interesting. So if you could talk on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually kind of covered this theme in 2 different ways, right? So I've covered the prediction markets angle and kind of a lot of what we're talking about today of, betting on anything and reducing the vig and actually having an event contract, and not to mention kind of the legal ramifications of doing something like that, where it's actually by the CFTC. You can do that in every state, where DraftKings and FanDuel have pumped so much of marketing spend into actually get over the hurdles of being legal in states. And still, California, Texas, Florida only has Hard Rock. They're not over the hurdle, but these prediction markets just slide right in and say, we're a financial instrument. So think about it from,
not to cut you off, but you're also seeing that with all the sweepstakes markets, right? Even Sleeper, right, which is a fantasy football platform, or call sheets prediction market, but like Sleeper or
Underdog, Prize
Picks, all those markets, Fliff.
Yep.
Like they run this sweepstakes model where you're not technically betting on sports, you're predicting whether or not something's going to happen for a credit on the site that is essentially $1. You're betting on sports, but they've been able to find that kind of middle ground in the legal landscape, which has my concerns as well. But
totally, yeah, and it's gonna be interesting to see how that actually evolves, because, like I said, these big companies that are much bigger than these emerging ones, and what I'm a believer of is I want to support kind of these emerging companies and try to have them and see them grow, because I think that's the beauty of America, is we see it early on and it takes off. And DraftKings and they all had their paths, but those companies are going to say, wait a second, we went through all the hoops and hurdles to get to this point of being legal. And even though they're changing their words and they're saying, you're not betting on it, you're just predicting. This isn't $1. It's just a prize pick coin or whatever. Yeah. Right, exactly. So we'll see how that's, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how that stuff all plays out. And I'm no legal expert, and I will never try to be, but I'm sure there's going to be some real changes in that market going forward. But the here and the now, right, for anyone betting or thinking about betting or following things like with my No Huddle features, prediction markets are here, and they seem like they're here to stay. If you look at kind of the handle as how much Call Sheet and Polymarket have been taking on sports bets now, it started off as kind of like an election thing, or, will it rain tomorrow? And now sports betting is taken off because people are realizing I don't have to pay that vig in the middle. I can just take a side, and it's going to be leveraged one way or another of who's the favorite or not, right? But it's just a contract. You're trading the event contract with someone else. It's literally like we're betting on each other, peer-to-peer, but just on a platform. But I think the other kind of thing in my most recent feature, No Huddle, to think about is how that life gamification is actually turning into real life. And for people like you and me who aren't, professional bettors or professional athletes, and how people are trying to bet on random things or create contests that are, your men's basketball league. Now there's a tournament that you can kind of win a prize for. You go play, I'm trying to think, like axe throwing, where you guys go with your work company, and there's an app now you can log in and you can bet on it, right? I go to 5 Iron to practice golf and in the indoor simulators, and there's an option now to log into the daily, challenges, par 3 challenge. Put $1 in, you can win however many people enter, you could win 20, right? So it's kind of the evolution of how gamification of life has now come in. And it's interesting to think about how, I'm very pro, and especially post-COVID, and, we have had an interesting experience with that kind of in our college years, but we need to get people back out into the real world and, talking and hanging out and meeting new people, right? And kind of being physical and, all that for your well-being, I think is so great for humans just by nature. And what could be the draw to have this next generation go do that is, what if we gamify it? What if we say, instead of just playing, men's volleyball or co-ed volleyball with your friends on the West Side Highway in Manhattan, there's a prize at the end, or every night you could bet on your game, right? they can add that in.
It's that gamification layer, right?
Totally. Yeah. And companies like Lucra Sports, who I was able to feature, they're building the software that's going to be embedded and entrenched, right? So in 5-iron, if you ever go hit on the simulator and you go, Lucra has built out the whole back-end software to then be able to have that dynamic leaderboard, to have that payout, right? They have all of the KYC, the compliance, the legal angles, to allow you to do that. And some people, that's the draw they need of, I'm going to go to 5-iron every night because I'm going to have the chance to win a few bucks, and that's my betting money, or that's my beer money, whatever you want to call it.
Those are the vendors that you're trying to like identify right now of who's going to be leading that space going forward.
100%, and that's exactly my MO. And I think it's funny, like especially this betting world that everyone's talking about. I published a feature on Lucra. I published one in my prediction ones on Cheerscast, which is another amazing company. It's kind of thinking about how you can gamify like a checkout process of a fan, right? So, for example, I went to Tom Brady's card vault, which is in No Huddle, right? So it's, think about your card store. If I don't know if everyone you're looking at, I used to collect trading cards and try to have all the Red Sox and put the lineup up, right? But so what's that collectibles market has boomed as well in sports. And so when you go to Tom Brady's card vault, because Cheers Cash is now implemented in it, you get an option at checkout. All right, the Knicks are playing tonight, right? It's a New York-based bet, or as they build and know me as a fan, they'll probably do a New England or Boston bet. And they say, okay, Knicks game over under 220.5, and I'll say over. And if my bet hits, I get 1% off my next sale there. If my bet doesn't hit, no dice. Cool, you're good.
I looked into this company a little bit. Like I read the article and I was looking at, like, this is insane to me. Like you have a company that's in the marketplace now that you can buy a product based on your bet, and it's like it's different than you win a bunch on DraftKings or you lose a bunch and you get credit for what you spent, or you get DK crowns on DraftKings, or Fanatics points or whatever, whatever each of the companies call it. But this is an actual vendor selling actual products, right? Not like DraftKings sponsored stuff. Like they're selling hats, right? They're selling cups and stuff like that.
Yeah. They're plugging into a whole bunch of e-commerce things, and I think their whole model is buy now, win later, right?
Yeah.
So you make that purchase, right? Let's just play it through. I buy this water bottle. I say the Knicks over is going to hit tonight. I pay full price. I'm going to watch that Knicks game because I'm excited for that bet. And the Knicks over hits in the Knicks game, and I get 50% off my next water bottle. Where am I headed back tomorrow? I'm back to the bodega. I'm getting the water, and I'm saying, I just got 50% off. Let's throw in a Twix bar, right? And think about that. Like, talk about the gamification flywheel. But I totally get it. And I'm a huge believer in what Drew at Cheers Cash is building, because that's what people want to do. Like, it adds that extra layer.
Yeah.
And if you're a business, if you're the bodega in the situation, why wouldn't you want to offer that, right? It's going to have me, Sam hit his bet. I didn't have to do anything. Cheers Cash plugged right into our point of pay system, and I'm back tomorrow. And what am I going to do? I'm actually going to buy more
product.
And that's what Drew was saying. Their thesis has been really playing through, and they're just really emerging too. And like we said, I'm all about trying to find the stars of tomorrow. And I don't want to botch the numbers, but they're seeing a ginormous uptick in the next sale right after they hit the bet, because I see a discounter, any consumer does. They're going to have a much larger purchase where they wouldn't have done that before, because they say, I get 20% off. I'll get something that's $500 now, or they may not even come back for more.
Well, you also run into that concern of like, okay, like I lost, now I got to get it back. And like, I bought that water yesterday, I lost. I got to buy water again today. I don't want to lose again. Let me double or nothing or whatever.
Let's bet on another one. Yeah, totally.
What's super interesting to me, and I'm not too familiar with like, I guess the scale that they could operate on, but like, for me, right? Again, I'm not a professional bettor. I'm not necessarily running into this issue all the time, but sometimes, depending on the market, right? Is it an issue of liquidity or, taxes even, right? I mean, I don't really talk about it too much on this show, but like, next year with the way that the tax landscape is, right? Where you're only going to be able to take 90% of your losses off of 100% of your winnings, right? You're leaving sports bettors with a 10% like just flat out loss, which I don't want to dive too into because that's a little bit too political for me, but that's a concern. But in that light, right, if you are somebody who is winning at sports betting or believes you can win at sports betting, right, if I need actual things, right, if I want to get my groceries, right, can I now take my sports betting opinions, which would be money to me, right? If my whatever my bankroll affords me a X return, I use that return to live my life. What if I instead bet it won and paid taxes on those winnings. What if I bet it with, a company like this, where now I can actually get the goods without paying the taxes, if that's how they operate?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many adjacencies to what you're talking about, right? And as the tax, we'll always have cycles like this, right? Of, there's now it's just like kind of betting is the big topic of like, wow, I was out in Chicago and they actually add in the Chicago state tower, I guess, state tax for Illinois.
It's like a tariff, essentially.
Yeah, literally, it's on top of, this is because you're betting in Illinois, right? So we're gonna probably see more things like that as states try to be smarter, or just, I mean, the elephant in the room is they're just trying to generate more revenue for the state, which is kind of the full cycle of why they're legalizing these books. But yeah, I mean, I think like that actually ties interesting enough to another theme that I've been following, and that's literally kind of what we're doing, is like the creator economy, right? You're kind of not only betting, but you're building a brand for yourself, right? And so hopefully one day you could have a bankroll, but also because of the brand that you've built, you can make money off the brand, and being, all these partners will want to be part of your brand. And so hopefully income wise, you're not, stuck between a rock and a hard place.
You're diversified.
Wow, I'm getting so much taxed that I can't, actually live my life. But you have these kind of other income streams because you've built something in that kind of creator economy. And we see it every day, right? Think about how many influencers there are just in general now, and what the following that they have. Some of the numbers are eye-dropping of how much they're making, how many views people have. And that's across the landscape. And then there's so many people in the betting world, right? Whether it's a Discord or, TikTok or any platform, right? Of throwing out their picks, but they have sponsors now. There's a platform based on, Twitter pays for impressions or, responses, right? Like things like that. There's other mediums now, hopefully in this creator economy creates that, where we can stay out of the politics. That'll always be a factor. Yeah. But we can find ways, for people who are actually building in that space to have other income streams, not being like, oof, all my money's tied up in DraftKings. Where do I withdraw?
if you'll allow me to throw out a quick PSA, like, this is why I'm a big advocate for not buying picks. I think a lot of people, they want to follow a quote unquote sharp bettor, or they want to follow somebody who they think wins on sports. And, you sell a pick package. You see it all the time with like, oh yeah, join my Discord. It's only $30 a month. And, I'll give you all these picks and we'll win. And, I really, I don't want to do that with my own brand, but at the same time, I'm actually a strong advocate against that. I want people to join my free Discord where, we're collaborating and we're talking about the games, because I think that has value for, the average everyday person to kind of go through games with other people who are of of that mindset. But talking about buying picks, right? Those people that are selling picks, they've gamified to a different degree. They're not in it to win. If you could win betting on sports, you don't need to pay. You don't need to sell picks. And, let's say you bet on sports and, your edges dry up and you're not able to get down the action that you want. That's a huge issue with liquidity in the market. And again, that's a much bigger conversation. But the vast majority of these guys that are selling picks, they are not at that level. They're not people that are like, oh, well, I didn't have enough liquidity for that. Or you run into the issue of, I'm going to sell picks because I want all these people to bet the wrong side. Yeah. The quote unquote wrong side, because I want to create market movement so that I myself can bet 10 grand on the other side of that game. And that can happen so easily, and that can happen even easier with prediction markets, in my opinion. But it's a little concerning that it's so normal for people to like go out and buy picks and not really thinking about the concept of, why is this person doing that? And because they're actually driving their revenue from the pick sale. They don't need to win betting on sports. They just need to convince you that they'll win.
Totally. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Betting oftentimes is predatory, right? From the sports books all the way down to the people charging you to literally say, oh yeah, the Eagles are going to win by 3.5 points, right? Like every part of that scale, there's a lot of predatory nature all the way through. And I think you make a great point that you're in it for the right reasons. And one thing that I'm really excited about to see is people like you, how they can be supported and still generate revenue without having to charge a premium just to simply have a pick. And that's not to say, what if you're giving them the wrong pick because you're trying to take the other side, right? Like that's a whole nother layer that's a whole nother discussion.
Which is very possible, right?
Which happens, and that's, it's unfortunate. But for people like you, like even thinking just the Cheers Cast example, like we talked about, right? You have all your free followers in your Discord. When you have merch that dropped, then you guys just drop some fire hoodies, right? But if you say you tagged on the Cheers Cash checkout process to buy this hoodie for what, 40, 50 bucks?
Yeah, $45 right? for a Noise Media OG hoodie.
There we go. Look at that plug.
Appreciate that.
Check out with this hoodie. Pick, you assign the game. This is no cost to you, but Cheerscast can plug that in. then people get a discount for the next time if they hit their bet to buy another thing. When you drop hats, when you drop a shirt, they come back, they go, yeah, I got 20% off the next time. I'm going to buy a shirt and a hat, right? And so then you can get a cut from those sales, obviously.
Right.
And Cheer Scouts gets a cut because they helped you grow your brand. So those are the kind of the adjacencies that I like really love and I'm fascinated by and want to feature and find more of in No Huddle. And I think those will be the ones, that doesn't even bring in, there's no legal issues to that, right? Like the money changing hands is you sold a hoodie. That's been ever since the start of time. People do that, the old bartering. Mm-hmm. So there's no actual like betting necessarily, but you took a bet. The bet wasn't even on a book. You just picked a number, and now look, you have the customer coming back for more, right? So that that could be a route for you to take as well, and that's not predatory. That's in good faith,
and that's also like very upfront, and you know exactly what you're doing. I think like stuff like that is a lot more interesting to me than continuing to see DraftKings grow or FanDuel grow because, again, like the way those companies grow is by charging more VIG. Mm-hmm. Like obviously, at their current VIG, if their handle is high enough, then, and that's part of their competition within itself. Like, a new entry to the marketplace is Fanatics. Like Fanatics launched far after the legalization of, PASPA and all that stuff, but Fanatics has leaped above Caesars and MGM and Rivers and all these long-standing casinos who thought that they could apply their casino strategy to online sports betting, and they got blown out of the water by DraftKings and FanDuel. You have something like Fanatics, who is much more concerned about the user than the VIG, which again, Fanatics is not the best play. You'll get banned very quickly, but as a casual bettor, right? Fanatics has leaped above all these other people in terms of market handle. And it's interesting to see a company like that actually focus on the user a little bit more where, we're kind of just used to VIG growing and, DraftKings and FanDuel taking the lead in this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, Fanatics is such an interesting one too, because what's the big difference with Fanatics? They're actually betting's not their first and main goal. It's going to clearly surge up, and I think Michael Rubin was just on a podcast talking about how much he expects it to grow as a core part of their revenue stream. But Fanatics is actually so many other things between the e-commerce angle, the live events angle, the collectibles angle that they're building out. They really are a conglomerate at this point, all under one hood. And shout out to Michael Rubin for building something like that, right? But because of that, they don't have to do the same focus so much on absolutely hosing bettors with VIG. They don't have to do the same pumping marketing, right? And why? Because people know the Fanatics brand. Sometimes on Twitter, it's not in the best limelight when they're making the jerseys for MLB. But people know Fanatics. It's extremely established. One way or another, we've all bought something off Fanatics, or we've been to a Fanatics event, or you want to buy a trading card. Fanatics is actually in that whole industry. Buy a collectible, right? And so because they're already plugged in, and I think another kind of big thesis that I have in kind of this investing landscape is you got to meet people where they are, right? So Fanatics is just doing just that. They're focusing on the customer first and the customer experience, treating them well. They're already there because, you go to let's UConn last night. You're wearing a UConn jersey that has Fanatics. It's Nike but maybe Fanatics produced it, but you know what I mean. And people are established. You have the fan, the fan already in your Fanatics ecosystem. You can give them a quick little email. Huskies are playing tonight because that they've bought 20 UConn things off your website. Right. Look at that. And that they can put the fan first, kind of curate what you want. Where DraftKings and FanDuel are pleading to learn more about you. But I mean, I'm a Boston fan. They don't know I like the Boston sports, right? Because I've never bet on them, right? And it's all kind of part of that whole system that I think Fanatics really has a leg up. Not, of course, they make revenue lots of different ways. But they also really know a consumer well, and they can focus on that and put consumer first. And companies, I think, that do that and care about the consumer more than anything else are going to be the ones that will continue to boom. Not that Fanatics needs any help with go-to-market.
This is my PSA to Fanatics. Michael Rubin, please unlock my account. I can't bet more than $42 on a NFL side. Come on, man. But for the average everyday person, it is what it is. Honestly, I could talk about kind of the e-commerce sports betting ecosystem all day and night, but I do want to kind of come back to what a lot of people are coming to the show for. It's week 15. We are in the dog days of the NFL season. Playoffs are shaking out. We kind of have an idea of who's good and who's not. What are you looking at this week? Anything you like? Any picks you might have?
Yeah. I mean, I'll hold off on a pick for this matchup because going back to my Cardinal rule, but my eyes are all 1:00 on Sunday.
Yeah.
Bills coming into New England, coming into Foxborough. everyone's been talking about the Patriots schedule, but what have they done? They've showed up every big game. They went to Buffalo, won that game. Tampa Bay, we can get into they've been, wishy-washy the last few weeks with some injuries, but they went down to Tampa, had another big win. So I'm so excited to see how the Pats coming off a bye, a little bit still banged up, but it's what they call a hat and t-shirt game, right? The Pats win, they clinch the AFC East, and I don't want to. Your listeners are probably a lot around from this area, so I'm not going to harp on it too much. But it's been some time since we've won the division.
There's a lot of Jets fans that are kind of happy about that.
I want to make sure that they hear that one. But I'm stoked for that, to kind of see how the Pats defense, they really contained Josh Allen, a couple weeks ago up in Buffalo. And to see, when Josh Allen's not able to get on the move and he's kind of literally backpedaling, that's, when you have him, where you want him. And so I think Vrabel has, really, really changed the course of the Patriots. And I won't go all on New England, but I'm so happy to see him, get another opportunity after he kind of got the shaft down in Tennessee and really be able to assert himself as a great leader and build a staff around and build players, right? The Patriots turnover has been, I think, 70% since last year's pretty horrible roster that had the 4th pick. But you
and one of the worst coaches that we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, unfortunately. But you talk about analytics and kind of the combination of what they've built, right? On paper, the Patriots don't really jump out off the room, but they put it together. They've won the games and they needed to, and here we are. So my first kind of big one that I'm looking at is 1 o'clock in Foxborough.
I mean,
let's
to me,
see where they stand in the AFC East.
This is also the Drake May MVP solidification game, right? If Drake May beats the Buffalo Bills with all eyes on him, clinches the AFC, clinches the East, but like the number 1 seed, there's no way he's not the MVP, especially after Stafford had that Carolina game. And I think it's going to be hand in hand, down to the wire with him and Stafford. But if he beats the Bills and then follows that up beating the Ravens next week, I have a lot of opinions on whether the Ravens are good or not. I mean, you're looking at a Drake May MVP.
Yeah, I mean, that's music to my ears for sure. But I think that's a great segue to Matt Stafford. And I think the general media and the general tone is finally, once he won the Super Bowl and all that, but let's give this guy some flowers, man. I mean, coming into the year, back injury, people were like, he might have to retire.
Yeah.
And what has he done? He has been absolutely insane. And you kind of look at also the body of his career, all those years in Detroit, but he's up there for some of the best quarterbacks of all time, in my opinion. And stats definitely show that, because he was airing it out down by a lot in Detroit for many years. And he had Calvin Johnson, which helped. But I mean, dude, talk about what a great collaboration between McVay and Stafford. Like, that was really just a match made in heaven. And even him at an older age and what they've done, and also the draft picks that the Rams just continue to hit on somehow, some way. They just,
and also hosing other teams for picks.
Devontae Adams, just kind of falls into their lap type of thing. But talking about kind of the two favorites, I think at this point on the AFC and the NFC, the Rams and the Pats. I don't know, the Pats probably, I know the AFC is a little bit murkier, but I was originally a Sean McVay hater back when the Super Bowl of Pats Rams, but I've got nothing to do but give the guy respect and credit for his creativity. I think watching how he just, for any people watching them this weekend, just watch Puka Nacua and watch how he's all over the field, how he motions. You'll see him actually take a snap in between the guard and the tackle, where it looks like he's just kind of like trying to chip block, and he'll go out for a route, right? And the defense, it's so hard to then manage that. Talk about communication stuff. We can kind of get into offensive formations, but being able to have a player as smart as Puka matched with a coach like McVay, and then have Stafford who can put the ball anytime, any place, and is also that smart. It's hard to say. It's hard for me to see a way that the Rams aren't, going to win it all, as much as my Pats bias wants to step in there.
I mean, McVay is like kind of the originator of a lot of the modern NFL offense, and his tree, and who he learned under, and where he, the Shanahans of the world, But the fact that if you do not run at least 50% motion on every single game, you will not win at the NFL level. Like you see at the Steelers, right? Like a guy like Mike Tomlin, who is kind of archaic, Pete Carroll and the Raiders. These are terrible offenses, wildly inefficient, and their motion numbers are one of the lowest in the league. And Sean McVay kind of created that, but Sean McVay, to his credit, continues to meta on the meta on the meta.
He innovates and all these derivatives off his kind of core.
Exactly, and that's why you're seeing them. I think Matt Stafford's excellent. I think Matt Stafford is, one of the best quarterbacks in the league talent-wise. But his ascension this year and his MVP case has a whole lot more to do with Sean McVay than it does, him getting better or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, to another game, and I was just seeing the temperatures. I was talking to another founder in kind of this, I would say in betting, they're actually building a company in golf betting when you go out and you know get closest to the pin, right? And you kind of record your shot and you could win money. So I was talking with the founder today, and he was, you know, outside of Chicago, and I was like, "How's the weather?" I just saw the headline of, you know, the Bears game this weekend. It's going to be a -10, I think, and you know, who knows with the wind and all of that. What are your thoughts on Caleb Williams? Where do you think he stands? I mean, his record kind of stands for itself, but I think there's been a lot of ups and downs on his development. Obviously, having Ben Johnson helps a ton too.
Sure.
But I'm wondering what kind of your thoughts on Caleb, and also,
Yeah.
you know, the Browns coming to town. The Browns are always, that's tough defense too.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of thoughts about the game individually. I'll first touch on Caleb. Like, I think Caleb has immense talent, right? And I think obviously getting a guy like Ben Johnson really like magnifies his pure talent. Decision making is still just not at the level we wanted to see for an NFL quarterback, especially, you know, a star quote unquote NFL quarterback. It's not quite there yet. The accuracy is not quite there yet. But Ben Johnson has designed a scheme that allows Caleb to play within his strengths, and that's getting out of the pocket, being creative, and making something on the move. So I think Caleb is better than people give him credit for. I mean, last year it's just really hard to judge him on that. Like, you know, he broke the sack record, I think, of like how many times he gets sacked.
Yeah,
like,
I was out in Chicago for the Patriots game. I think they sacked him 7 times, and that was the Patriots D-line. That was not like it was this year.
Yeah, I mean, interesting too. Like with Drake May, he's been sacked, I think, the most in the league, and he's still like, all his EPA numbers are great. So it's like, despite being sacked all the time, he's still excellent. I mean, I don't need to give Drake May more flowers than he already gets. I mean, you know, talking to Boston guys here, like, Drake May's great, we know. But going into this game, right, with the Browns, I think, you know, you've seen this pretty much every year, right? The Browns are one of, if not the best defense in the NFL. Myles Garrett might be the single best player we have in the NFL. Yeah. And he is more than likely, if he stays healthy, to break the all-time sack record. He already broke his own, you know, Browns record. So he's gotten that, but they gave up 29 points to the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah.
I'm a believer that Cam Ward has a lot of talent. I think he will be okay in the long term if the Titans are able to get real coaches in there. Right now, it's a little bit of nonsense, and that nucleus isn't super strong. But maybe the wide receiving core has some potential. But like, you know, the scheme OC offensive line is quite poor. But they scored 29 points on the Browns, and you see this every year with the Browns. Is kind of towards the end of the season, you know, they have a losing record. They have no hopes of making the playoffs. They oftentimes kind of let up a little bit. And yeah, that pass rush is still elite, and Myles Garrett can certainly get 7 game-breaking sacks by himself. But like, you know, what's the chances that they're really going to do that, you know, to the extent that they're holding teams to 10, 17 points at this point in the season? I don't think so. So that's a game that I actually like the over. So cold weather generally is not that impactful. Wind is something that you want to look at a lot more, and more importantly, like wind that's above 15 miles an hour sustained, because gusts are gusts, right? If it's gusting, don't throw it. Try to wait to kick if it's gusting. But when you have sustained winds above 15 miles an hour, that's when you start to get you know, some issues with the offense and throwing the ball down the field. But generally, cold weather doesn't have a huge impact on stuff. So when I'm looking at that game, right, with the Browns and Chicago, I like the over. I mean, when I'm looking at a total of 38.5, 39 in market, I think that's low. I think Chicago is going to be able to put up 24, 25 points by themselves easily. So, you know, maybe you can take that angle of like just taking Chicago team total, because, you know, Shedeur Sanders is not exactly an NFL quarterback at this point in time, although he had a good game last week. And
so he's showing some signs.
Yeah, he actually looked good. I mean, I've been a little bit critical of him. He looked good, but this is a game where, you know, Myles Garrett's probably going to have 2 to 3 sacks by himself, but I like the over. I don't think it's going to be as impactful as people are making it
I think
out.
you make an interesting point. So the over is anchored quite low, right? Just to start, weather's a factor. You know, the Browns offense is like, we don't know.
Right.
But the kind of factor of like, where are the Browns at? They're out of the playoffs. Like, what's kind of their motivational status? I think the other layer to that, which hopefully helps over in your case with that bet, is Kevin Stefanski's kind of coaching for his job. And what's his expertise? He's an offensive guy. You know, maybe he doesn't have the quarterback he thought he was going to have, from Baker all the way to Deshaun, that we could go through the whole list if we have all day.
Yeah.
So, there's excuses to be made, and a lot of those aren't his fault, right? That's kind of a ownership management,
Sure.
a lot of how it went. But he's got to deal with the guys who are going to be, cold and dressed this weekend. And he's got to prove it one way or another, because in a couple weeks, he's going to be he could be one of those guys who's out. And so what's a good chance? And if I was himself trying to sell his agent that I'm sure is already trying to prepare this pitch, if they can go to Chicago, put up some points, I'm an offensive guy, right? That's his sell. We went to the Bears, who are a top team in the NFC. Record-wise, we can debate where they really stand, but they've been legit. They've gone toe-to-toe with the Packers last week, et cetera. If Stefanski can show, we put points on the board, not to maybe squeak out a win. I don't know about that, but coming kind of both ways there. He's going to draw it up. He's going to give it his shot, so hopefully the motivation's there. And we'd already talked about Myles Garrett. He can disrupt the game just enough on his own. So I like that play from you. That seems sharp.
Yeah, I think that's a number that's going to get bet throughout the week. So at 39, I think it's a fine play. I think you'll see this close in that 40.5 range. Not that that's really a key number or anything, but I think that's something that you're going to see some market support for, unless we get some crazy weather report. Which in Chicago is that's another thing too. To talk about in general, weather reports in the certain stadiums, there's certain stadiums that do not really get impacted by the weather. I mean, I hate to bring up a baseball example on this football podcast, but San Francisco Oracle, right? You can tell me, I don't care what the weather is in Oracle. You could tell me that the winds are 50 miles an hour and it doesn't matter. The way that stadium is built, they are going to block all the impact from wind. You have the marine layer, right, which kind of keeps things, a little bit lower or whatever, but wind in San Francisco is not really a factor based on how those stadiums are built. So when you bring it back to the NFL, Chicago, MetLife, right? These are stadiums that are actually impacted by wind. If you have a high wind game, the Browns, Cleveland is going to be impacted by wind or going to be impacted by snow. Those are actual stadiums that are going to feel the effects of it versus, another stadium, I can't think off the top of my head, but another stadium is going to more block out the win than other ones.
Yeah, those are super thoughtful, kind of angles to think about too. And I wonder too. So when you're thinking about through this bet, because the forecast clearly as a highlight of a play, you kind of recommend to kind of your audience to get ahead of that line because you think it will move up, or do you kind of wait and see because we could wake up on Sunday and they're like, oh, actually, it's a snowstorm and there's crazy wind.
Yeah, I mean,
so how do you kind of determine that? I know it's something.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's taking a roll of the dice at this point with weather being a factor.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, honestly, and that's something that's really difficult to do. Which sometimes you got to take an opinion, you got to stick with it. If I think the wind impact is not going to be that high, and I make an opinion, I'm going to have to live with that bet. And obviously, if you're betting semi-significantly like I am, that's a position that I'm going to have to live with. But when I'm talking about a game like Cleveland with Chicago, I think both teams are going to be able to run the ball. So even if the weather is highly impactful on the game, both teams should be able to run the ball against one another. So again, if you have a big game that's a run-heavy game where you don't end up seeing a ton of offensive possessions, that's usually something where an under is probably going to be in play. But it depends on the number. And when you have a 39.5 where I think Chicago is going to have no issue running or throwing, especially an intermediate game. They're not going to be that heavily impacted by it. So this is an example of I would like to get ahead of it because even if it goes lower, I might double down. I think they're going to be able to run pretty easily in this case. Yeah,
and then I know we'll talk about it. I'm interested to hear what else you got on your slate, but
yeah.
I know we slandered the Browns for a little bit there, and now we can go down their quarterback route. But I will give them a quick nod on how well they drafted this past year, right? They kind of passed up on some of the the bigger names, and they actually had, I think, an amazing draft with Mason Graham, Quinshon Judkins, Harold Fannin, Carson Schweichinger.
Yeah,
right? They had a ton of huge hits that whoever they do decide to roll out a QB next year, maybe they're going to pick again. Maybe it's Shadur. Maybe it's Deshaun Watson off an Achilles.
God, I hope not.
Who knows? They do actually have a pretty solid foundation. I think they're working on, not to mention the elephant in the room of Myles Garrett is the most disruptive player in all of football. So things could be looking up for our friends out in Cleveland. Well, I do want to give them some kind of nod there because I do think that they did identify talent really well and they made some really solid picks that will hopefully be a part of their foundation where next year the line may be flipped. We're talking in week 15, maybe they're doing okay.
With Chicago kind of being a little bit fickle. They're good and the offense I do believe is good, but I don't think the defense is good. And a lot of their defensive success is predicated on turnovers. And again, as a gambler, like turnovers are not super predictive. Yeah, you can say the defense made a good play, but they made a good play. Like success rate is actually a lot more predictive than turnovers, even though turnovers have more impact on the actual game. So when I look at a team like Chicago, I'm like, this is a bottom 10 defense, but they have I think they have the lead in terms of interceptions right now, and that's making them appear to be a really good defense, in which they're not.
Yeah.
I'll go back to your Patriots really quick just to give out another pick. This is actually going to be my Sweet Gains frozen lock for Week 15. Sweet Gains is a protein ice cream company providing a high-protein, low-calorie option to help you with your fitness goals. The Bills and the Patriots over 49 is my Sweet Gains frozen lock this week. I am not a believer in the Patriots defense. Yeah, I hate, it's awfully square of me, honestly, but I'm not a believer in the Patriots defense. I know for a fact the Bills defense is not good. I think you can run very easily on the Bills, which will open up the passing game. Obviously, we talked already. We're not going to keep talking about Drake May, how good he is. But they're going to carve them up.
I'll go on that.
They should be able to carve them up pretty easily. And the Bills are in must-win mode, right? They're gonna need to push the ball. And even if they run a lot, I think the Patriots defense is gettable. And I'm expecting points. So, again, I'm sure everybody and their mom is going to bet the over in that game because it's two of the best quarterbacks. But I do think at 49 or anything under 50.5, I think is a good play.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely laid it down kind of on my thought on that game, but I totally could see that. And I think, like you said, the big thing is the Bills, they got it. It's go mode, right? And it's not only go mode for, are you guys going to lose the AFC East? That was supposed to be your guys' time to shine. But it's also, let's get in the playoffs. Let's get a good seed. Like, let's go. And this is their kind of proven moment where they were upset a few weeks ago up in Buffalo. They're going to bring it. I know Joe Brady's going to have some things dialed up. Josh Allen is an absolute stud. So, like I said, I hope the Pats can contain as a fan. I got to stay away due to my Cardinal rules, but I think I do like kind of that pick and how it's trending for sure. I could definitely see a shootout up in Foxborough this weekend.
Absolutely. I'm honestly not really interested in either of the sides. I think Bills -1 is pretty fair. The Patriots have climbed up in ranking every week, and in terms of power ranking have climbed up because the question is always, are the Patriots as good as their record? And as they keep winning games, you're forced to improve their power ranking. So, we won't belabor that point. We probably have time to talk through just one more game. So, anything else you're looking at this week you're interested in?
I mean, the game that I think I'm most stoked to watch is that 425 slate. Got Green Bay, at Denver.
Also, just to throw out there, did you see Denver is going to be like 60 degrees on Sunday?
Oh wow!
Which, like, I mean, if you're like a skier, like, I'm sorry, like, this is gonna suck. But like, mile high in like 50, 60 degree weather in December is quite strange right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely stoked to see that. That's gonna be two kind of heavyweights going at it. Two, great coaches in my opinion. Two teams that are very well built, and two teams that I expect to make very strong playoff runs, in prime time, going toe-to-toe in that 4 o'clock slate. What side are you taking on that one?
I'm not a big Bo Nix guy. I think I've been burned by the Packers a lot with, their advanced numbers are so good. Their EPA per play, Jordan Love EPA per play is so good. But as you watch them and you actually see how that translates on a down-by-down basis, they make a lot of huge mistakes. I'm glad to see that they kind of put it all together a little bit against Chicago, where they had a firm victory, even though Chicago did have a chance to tie it up and whatever. But I think Green Bay is much better than Denver. But my concern with Denver is just I don't think Bo Nix is all that good. Yeah. But that being said, I think the Broncos are a super, super strong teaser leg this week, given that I don't think the Packers are built to win by margin.
Yeah. I'm with you, and I lean honestly the same way with Bo Nix. I'll give him all the credit in the world. I think what he's done, he's a proven winner, right? He clearly kind of has that it factor of kind of games on the line. He's had a number of game-winning drives. He does make a play when it's needed, but if it comes down to making a few plays, I'm not taking Bo Nix. I'm taking Jordan Love and that cadence. But the Broncos as a whole, as a unit, we're talking offense, defense, special teams, coaching. I think, especially if you're teasing them a few points up, that seems like a great option to add and get some action in the primetime slot, right? You always want, once the red zone moves to a few less games, you want to make sure you got something on.
I think the Broncos are a strong case, and if there's any prop angles, I usually run my prop numbers on Sunday morning, so I'll put the props in the Discord. I hate to cut it off, but I think this is going to be the end of the show. Sam, really appreciate you coming on, man, and thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, dude. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Noise Podcast. We are throwing our next live Thursday Night Football watch-along at Connect Astoria on December 18th. It's going to be the Rams and Seahawks game, battle for the NFC West. We hope to see you guys there. Details for that event will be in the bio. Remember to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms, Apple Music, Spotify, and if you're watching on YouTube, thanks for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe. That's going to do it for this episode of the Noise Podcast. This is your host, Max Gilson. Godspeed.